Okay, well, welcome. I think we're live. Sometimes we're just so used to it now, and sometimes we're not. So, wanted to make sure that we were on here again. Ping here, he, him, his with the Men and Masculine Folks Network, a program of men as peacemakers out of Duluth. That's where our head organization is. Welcoming everybody back, I think, to our bi-weekly kitchen table conversation series, where a bunch of us as men and masculine folks are having conversations towards practicing healthier masculinity and manhood and navigating the complexity of other issues that are intersecting with our lives or we're being impacted by on a daily basis. And though, again, these conversations are meant for us to actually explore and continue to converse with one another and deepening our understanding of how we actually practice healthy masculinity in our lives in a way that doesn't actually impact others around us so much, and in a way in which allows us to actually to not also choose violence as a way to actually get out of situations easily. So happy today that I really want to mention that Kayleb is joining us in this conversation. And so I wanted to say that first, and before I let everybody introduce themselves, obviously, including Kayleb as well too, as our guest star for the conversation that we're going to be having today. But I'll let you all of the other men and masculine folks, siblings here, brothers here, introduce themselves, and then we'll get into the conversation.
Hello, everyone. My name is Felix Martinez. My pronouns are he, him, and his. I'm reporting from Ian, Minnesota. Super happy and excited to be here today.
Hello, everyone. Serrano Robinson, he, him, his pronouns out of Duluth for today. Thank you.
Roderick Saltha reporting from St. Paul, he, him, his.
And hey, everybody, I'm Sean Hayes, he, him, his as well. Also up in Duluth, watching some snowflakes come down. Glad to be here with y'all.
Hey everyone, this is Kayleb, based in Madison, Wisconsin with Freedom Inc. I go by he, him, and they, them pronouns. Thanks for having me.
Thank you. And as always, we appreciate Juliana for doing the tech support and the help behind the scenes on Facebook Live at this moment. So if you're watching us, participating with us in this moment, right at this time, in live time with us, welcome your comments, questions, whatever you have to share with us would be always great. We always appreciate the interactions. And if you're not able to, as always, you can catch us afterwards on YouTube as well, or even from our Facebook page, and comment in there and share your thoughts and your ideas and what you're thinking or how this conversation is furthering your own understanding about your own masculine experiences in your on how you're practicing it and navigating it in your own life. You know, Saturday, I was going to say tomorrow. It feels like Friday, but it's not. There's so many things happening actually. So Saturday is actually Trans Remembrance Day. You know, every year during November, I think they set out that day on the 20th there, if I'm not mistaken, to really think about how do we give visibility and really honor trans folks, particularly those who've actually passed, especially for those who actually experienced violence, right, and have been actually killed or murdered or have been missing. And we know this is one of the things that we haven't talked about too much here in these conversations a whole lot in many ways. And we also understand that the lives of trans folks and gender non-conforming folks is also really important as well too. Because we live in a society where those lives actually don't matter, right? And that people don't actually care for those folks too much, or that those folks are not seen and heard really often. So today's conversation is a really conversation that's going to really focus in on that and focus in on what it means for us as men and masculine folks, and really having the honor and the privilege of having Kayleb and now Rox, who will welcome themselves in here into the conversation about what it means as masculine identifying trans masculine folks, trans men folks. What does it mean for you all in terms of the 20th? And just having a conversation with us as cisgender straight men as well too, about what does that mean for us in terms of our responsibility and our accountability in moving in our lives to be able to actually help reduce or lessen the harm that actually is created and the benefits that we all could be benefiting from in some ways around masculinity. And aside from that, the other thing that is actually on my mind that I'm actually not able to articulate too well at this moment is because it's Give the Max to the Max Day as well in the state of Minnesota. And so once a year, it just happens to be today, that today was the day that was Give to the Max, where a lot of nonprofits are asking for donations and funds from a lot of people throughout the state and elsewhere in the country. So definitely donate to the organizations. Sean will talk about later where and how to donate to some of the organizations that are part of our network here as well too. And there's plenty more that we've always talked about these conversations that we've shared with all of you to definitely support, especially the organizations that are doing the kind of work that we are actually doing and about we're talking about and conversing. So before I go further, I want to welcome Rox to the conversation here, let them introduce themselves, and then I'll share some guiding questions and we'll go into it.
Hey everyone, thanks for having me. I'm Rox. I like the pronouns they and them. Good to see some familiar faces. What's up, Roderick? How you doing? Long time no see. Kayleb, a lot of y'all. I am the current director of the Minnesota Transgender Health Coalition. I have lots of identities and hats that I wear. I've been, you know, a masculine of center person since I lots of redirections around that throughout my life, and have really been fortunate to be in community, most of which who just really accept me as I am, and let me, you know, come and show up as I feel. And so I guess that's where I'll start with today. And if there are any questions, feel free to hit me up as we go along.
Thanks, Rox, and thank you for joining us. We're really appreciating your presence in the conversation as well too. So yeah, thinking about trans folks, thinking about gender non-binary folks, thinking about gender non-conforming folks, what do us as men and masculine folks show up, and how do we show up in that? What does that mean for us in our relationships and the relationships that we have with those individuals in community or from a peripheral? If we're not in relationship with those individuals, how do we show up for that community and those individuals in ways that are loving and caring, but also in ways that actually uplifts and amplifies their experiences and their voices, right? And I know that there's also a tension point as well too, because we understand that much of actually the harm and the violence that are experienced by trans folks are done by cisgender men as well too, in a society that actually values people who have the identities and the parts that they quote unquote think about as real men having too at the same time too. So I know that that tension exists, perhaps even in this conversation itself too, and wanting to acknowledge that and wanting to think about how we actually move about that in the contradiction, quote unquote, of this conversation as well too. So there's really no guidance there, but like, what are we thinking about? What's on your heart as Trans Remembrance Day is right around the corner. What should we be celebrating? What should we be honoring? What should we be talking about? What should we be talking about? And what should we be saying?
I mean, I personally think we should be talking about Black trans women, like period, point blank. You know, we've spent a lot of time, energy, and effort, especially in the LGBT community, talking about rights, our right to marry, our right to, you know, show up as, you know, regular heterosexuals get to show up in the world. And all along, marching to the celebration of, you know, corporate sponsored pride, forgetting that we are able to do that through the work and the efforts of, you know, street transvestite action revolutionaries, Marsha P. Johnson and Sylvia Rivera. Those are the things that we should be thinking about right now. Those are the voices that we should be remembering. Those are the voices that we should be putting out as we, you know, move towards Trans Day of Remembrance, which is just at the end of this week, where undoubtedly across the United States and really the world, people will read off the names of dead transgender people, people who were murdered, killed in violence, often due to racism and sexism, homophobia and transphobia. Many of those folks will be dead named and buried in the names that they were given at birth and not the names that they go by in everyday life. So I think that, you know, right now on Give to the Max Day or Give Out Day or whichever give day it is, that we should be putting our money to organizations that work to better the lives of trans folks and be talking about the histories of those folks who made it possible for us to have 450,000 people in Loring Park every June talking about, woo, let's celebrate. Okay, that's my little rant.
Sorry, Pink, can you repeat the question again? Just so I can have my brain flowing.
Yeah, just like what's on your heart or what's on your mind as Trans Remembrance Day is around the corner, and what is it that we should be saying or doing or thinking about?
Yeah, I think for me, when it comes around this time of year, or just when there's a murder of trans folks, particularly like Rox said, there's a term, trans misogynoir, right? Hate specifically towards Black trans women, and that it's really important. I'm echoing what Rox says, to really uplift those voices and those folks who have been murdered. It's personally for me, like impact as a trans person, not the most my proximity depth is not as close to those folks, but for me, it's already like really hard. It's kind of like hard to think about and tell you what should you prepare yourself for this day, because for me it like messes up with you emotionally. But as a masculine person, I've been thinking a lot about what does it mean for myself? How do I hold myself accountable to harm that I've done cause on folks? How do I teach my peers, especially my fellow trans men, like what does patriarchal violence look like within us? And I don't know, I'm always in the mood where like, how can I move my own people, my trans masculine men? And I've also, I don't know, I've been thinking about deep things. I've been thinking about capitalism a lot, right? Like how, and something I want to talk about more is how capitalism impacts patriarchy, right? Like capitalism, you want to produce babies produce money, right? And when you don't, and when you're trans and maybe you don't choose to go those route, reproducing and stuff like that's where you're invaluable to the community. And those are things I'm thinking about. I'm sorry, I'm thinking so deep, but like I'm thinking I'm an organizer, so I'm always thinking about how do I stop this, right? And for me, I guess personally, I also just need to slow down and really on Saturday and just kind of remember those and celebrate myself and remember those before me. And I'm sorry, I get really nervous somehow when I know I'm live, so excuse me if I'm stuttering.
I'm gonna say you're doing great. And yeah, I think it's really interesting just to hear where each of us are at around this, because I mean, I think I definitely relate, Caleb, to what you're sharing of like it's just such a heavy emotional time. And as a trans person, I think about it kind of in two ways as far as like you know, what does it look like for me to you know, show up for my community on this day, and like how do we actually create spaces where trans plus folks, you know, gender nonconforming folks, two-spirit folks can gather on this really hard day and like actually like care for each other. You know, because as you can imagine, reading, you know, 400 plus names of people who have been murdered, most often times very brutally, all across the world, can be really intense and really mess with you. So yeah, I definitely echo that. And I know for me personally, you know, this year feels extra challenging, you know, for a couple of reasons. One being that it, you know, now we're hearing that it's like the most deadly year on record now in the US for trans folks who've been murdered. The vast majority of those Black trans women, Latina trans women. And so, gosh, I don't know. Yeah, I guess I'm losing my train of thought. But the other piece of that is like, you know, taking care of our folks and holding that and holding all the things that we're feeling. And then also like awareness raising, you know, kind of feels old at this point for the cisgender community. But those folks who, you know, maybe identify themselves as allies or people who are wanting to, you know, be allies or accomplices to our community. I don't know. That's an interesting thing because it is such a tough day, I think, for those of us in the community. And so, you know, I think I've been really lucky to have allies in my life who show up at these things and don't take up space and don't try to, you know, I don't know, profess their allyship, you know, and sort of take over in that way. But yeah, just sort of holding that it's, you know, it's definitely multiple truths, different ways all of us experience it.
You know, I think about what you just shared there, Sean, and to both what Caleb and Rox shared as well too, is that it's so vitally important that as a cisgender male identified person, you know, doesn't often to identify, who doesn't identify too often as masculine in many ways, and in some ways, it's really important that I am able to, and I have the ability to actually like challenge and push other cisgender men to actually show up, right, and be there and be in support, not just when those events happen, right, but similar to, I think, the conversations we've been having in these kitchen tables for the last year and a half now, almost, that it's this lifelong journey of us actually understanding how to actually show up and how to be there. Because on that day, exactly to the point that you, Sean, and Caleb were saying, is that it brings up so much emotional and hard and challenging ways to actually show up and be in community, but you have to be in community, right? And then you have to think about yourself and your own safety as well too. And how do we, as folks who are in support and amplifying your experiences and your voices, show up in ways that actually take away some of that burden? It may not take all of it away, because I don't think that that's not that it's not possible, but I think that it's I don't want it to come off as like a saviorship where it's like, oh, people can take all the burden away, right? But there is some recognition there where I think that some alleviation can actually happen. And I think about that in terms of like not just only that day, but every day of my life, thinking about how do I actually make sure the manifestations and experiences in the lives of trans folks, gender non-conforming folks are really actually present and centered in whatever it is that I do, right? And it isn't just because I have relationships with the three of you who are here with us in this conversation, you know, Rox, Sean, and Kayleb, but it is beyond that, right? The relationships just enrich it, just make it richer. But it is beyond those relationships that it becomes more meaningful and it becomes more accountable and becomes more what I want to say is like where I can actually like practice and really think about what does it mean to live in community and be able to actually honor folks in community as well too, you know? And so I think of it as a heavy day, and I think of it as not just a one-time thing for people, but I do want to say to all the cisgender men out there who are listening, such as myself too, is that we have to do more, right? Because these are the lives, to Rox's point, especially for trans Black lives and gender non-conforming lives. Those are the lives that we actually don't hear about often, don't get reported, don't get seen. Who knew that, to Sean's point, that there was like more deaths this year than any other year of trans lives? If you didn't look it up, you wouldn't have known, because that would have not been shared anywhere. That would have been not talked about. And that's what we are talking about, is that kind of like violence, of the invisibility of that violence, the violence that nobody talks about, nobody wants to address because it's not worth it, right? And I think that that's like the emotional part of it as well too, as I hear myself talk, and even in this conversation, of like the sadness and the hurt about being able to actually not be seen and heard in the community. And I know for the longest time, even like some of the folks in the mourn community, LGBTQ folks talk about it. And Kayleb often says it too, is like not having ways to identify yourself so people can actually understand or call you. That kind of invisible violence is really crucial. And I think that it's important for us as men and masculine folks to really talk, to Kayleb's point, about the patriarchal violence that we actually participate in and can enact by just actually doing nothing, right? But the very fact that if we can actually have more visible conversations and more visibility and more practices and more policing of this violence, then perhaps it could actually be reduced.
Definitely kind of one of those, like, as a masculine person, you're like, well, I don't like harm people or hit people, so I'm like, cool, I've like done the work, I'm done. But it's much more deeper than that. You actually have to go out and support. Like, how do I show up unapologetically in a way that I'm not like, first of all, in the way that I know my role, in the way that I'm not speaking for anyone, but in a way that I'm actually like being an advocate, like sitting side by side and making sure that their voices are heard and valued, whether they are at events or like when I'm working with youth who are coming into their identities, and supporting them on those aspects too. Whether it's one, helping them know that they are valued, you know, no matter what, and also assuring that the other youth in the group who don't identify as them or who identify different, that it's also about value, and it's not about who identity gets what value, but we all have value no matter our identities. So that's kind of my little role in being unapologetic and supporting the youth that I work with as they come up into their full identities. And I love it. It's pretty cool. Like, there'll be times where we'll have youth like literally come out in group, and just the fact that like it's so normal and the response is so like loving and nurtured is really, really dope. And then also I thought about like one thing that we should talk about is like why the murders happen. I think it's kind of like one of those systematic things where we deem them as like isolated incidents, when in all reality it's not, right? Like talking about why it actually happens instead of just like, because I think people who don't understand it, they just see it as people just like die, right? Like every day. And it's like, no, this is like systematically happening in a way where people don't feel and are not safe at all, physically or emotionally. So I think that is one of the biggest parts to talk about too, is like why the murders are happening. I think for people, that's a good step back too, right? Because they're like, oh, I don't like to talk about these hard things. And, but that's the only way. Like, I'm one of those people who know that for truth and for reason, that's the only way you really like understand why things are happening, is actually putting your face to the front of it, you know, even if it does look dark, even if it does, even if you have played a role or are actively playing a role in the violence towards trans people. I think people are afraid to just kind of look at that mirror, basically, because you'll learn a lot. So that's just what I've been thinking about, is like, how do I show up, like, first of all, unapologetically, and for the youth that I work with specifically every day, not just in November, and not just on the 20th, and talking more deeply about like why the murders actually happened. Like talking about that there needs to be an actual shift in values, and who the fuck even started to decide who decides to be valued in the first place. There should be a shift in that, most importantly too.
Yeah, thank you, Serrano. The more I listen to you guys, I'm really honored to be here. But at the same time, as a cisgender, I start thinking in myself and what I can do in order to create more inclusive space, especially when you work in schools, when you work with other cisgender males, in order to create more inclusive spaces. How to become a better ally, how I can create more awareness. And also in schools, when we know incidents happen and schools don't have the resources, don't know how to deal with it, So I think spaces like this are spaces to learn, because I'm learning the same way I'm learning how to become a better man. I'm learning how to become a better ally, how to support, other transgender men, created spaces for those transgender men to feel, loved, to feel respected, to not to wait till November to celebrate, or not to celebrate, or just to remember this day. I'm sorry, but just to create, spaces that everybody feel respected, but everybody feel love, and everybody have the same opportunities. And when we think about that, and how many transgender people dying, it doesn't make sense, and I can see how this, how, male, the homophobia is part of it, that scare of men, of, to a better understanding, how we can support, how we can start breaking that unhealthy, toxicity that we have in our communities, and created better communities that are based in love and our values, like Serrano say. We're much better than that. We, as a community, we need to work in the systems. We need to work in our public policy. We need to work in all that, just in order to create safer spaces and make other men accountable, because we're part of it. We're the big problem in this case, and it's not till we have this type of conversation that we start creating that awareness and that understanding, and not being afraid of talking about it is a good start.
It makes me think about, I think what Obama would always say about, for the grace of God, therefore go I, right? In the sense of two things. One, in the sense of having a clear sort of examination of sort of what sort of the popular narrative is, and that is that Black masculine men are under attack. That's one narrative. It is certainly not the central narrative that has it's not the central narrative that I think is important, I should say. I think the other thing it makes me think of is that these conversations about stand your ground laws and the misapplication of those, right? Because when you think of sort of, those don't come into play in these situations where someone is trying to defend themselves, right? They don't come into play in domestic violence situations. They seem to come only into play in the 2 or 3 cases that we've seen pop up, right? But yet they're sort of these statewide laws that sort of only cover seemingly white men with guns, right? And so that's what this, as I'm thinking about this, it really does remind me to be really vocal about having people look at other things, right? And I say other things, what I mean is fine, talk about stand your ground in these cases, but let's talk about it full cloth, right? So that we don't only talk about masculine Black men who are being marched for, right? And protected and lifted up, and all of that's good. This doesn't take anything away. But all the people that we're not lifting up, and why, and also I think me thinking about sort of the distance that we put between ourselves and folks we're mourning, right? So that's what is top of my head right now, is that sort of trying to reanalyze, and in reanalyzing, trying to reorient my focus.
Sorry, I want to add in. I was just listening to everybody talk, and I think Sereno had mentioned like we should talk about like why these things happen, right? And I've been thinking about that, like why does violence happen, right? And that was in a training the other day. One of my mentor, Adams, has said like they were in training spaces where the facilitators would actually open up like there is no actual space, safe space for you in this world we live in, right? Like anywhere I go, nobody can create a safe space for me because you're a person of color, you're trans, right? Like you're not safe unless you're a white man, white cis man, right? And it makes me think about like, what can we actually do then? That's something you can't control right away, right? Like, so what can you do to better people's lives? And I'm thinking like, outside of Trans Remembrance Day, like, how can we actually make resources more accessible to trans folks? Just getting their basic needs, right? Like when people get the basic needs, they'll thrive. I think of myself an example. I think, not saying I didn't go through hardship, but I think a lot of people invested in me, and like in some ways, like I feel as a trans person, I'm thriving more than I ever could imagine in my life, right? But like, yeah, how do people get access? How do people even find out, how can I transition if I want to? Like, these are things that are barriers within my community. And I know that if folks had access to those resources, they would be thriving. If people had a home to live in, they would feel safe in their own home, right? Like houselessness is such a big issue in the trans community. And I'm just thinking like, how do we do more outreach and education? I think within trans violence, there is something that people are so scared to talk about because it's seen as taboo, but there's a violence within people's body parts and their private parts. And there's something just so perverted about people thinking about what's between somebody's legs and how it should align with their gender. That's very perverted to me. And then those people over sexualize queer and trans people, but you're actually the one, you know, it's like thinking about what's between my leg. And I think there's a violence there that not a lot of people talk about.
Yeah, I was just listening to you, Caleb, too, and just thinking about like there's so many different dynamics here and tensions that, you know, like why does this happen? Why are trans folks being murdered? You know, it's like, I mean, for me, I think it just comes down to flat out fear. People are scared of what they don't know, don't understand, whatever. But then, yeah, thinking about homelessness, thinking about trans kids who are kicked out of their homes and that are homeless, and all of these risk factors that go way, way up. And that resource thing, Caleb, like that's huge. And I also, have a lot of privilege and I'm very grateful for very similarly having people who invested in me, who saw me as being someone who's valuable, and not just because I'm trans or, it's just one part of who I am, right? And of who we are. And I guess the other thing I'm thinking about too is like, for the people who don't really know much about Trans Day of Remembrance, you know, all of this data that we have, which is like not a lot. There's not a lot of actual good data out there about trans folks, about our experiences with violence and so that is one thing that I know I always hear trans folks and organizers talking about is like, we know that there are 46, 47, I think now, trans people who have been murdered. And we know that that number is probably a lot higher. And for so many reasons, right? I think someone mentioned people, when these folks are killed, they're not reported to the police with their correct name, if they haven't had their legal documents changed or had that name change, as someone who, was planning an event around Trans Day of Remembrance and looking at each of these people, looking at their faces, reading the stories that we do know about them, reading quotes, from friends who dearly miss these people. It's just, I think that's another big part for me is like, who are all the other people, like the unknown folks out there who don't make a list on the Human Rights Campaign or, whatever. And then the other piece for me is thinking about all of the folks who have died by suicide as well, due to like all of these very similar reasons, like the violence, the transphobia, not being able to access housing, employment, or they do have a job and people, are misgendering them and they're dealing with microaggressions all day, every day, especially folks of color who are also trans. And that's always something that people ask me about, and I don't always have a good answer is, what about folks who have died by suicide, and do we include them? And as someone who has lost a dear trans friend this year to suicide, it's painful. It's painful that, to think about all the people in this world who just don't care, will not take the time to read, will not give a crap about TDOR, and so I don't know, I guess I'm feeling grateful in this moment for all of the people that I am really lucky to have in my life who do validate me and who do see me, and who care about my safety.
I really appreciate you, bringing up those folks who have passed due to suicide. I think it's something that we don't talk about nearly often enough. And most of us in trans community are impacted by that in some way. Um, and, I think maybe somebody should. Why not you? And that's not a challenge or that's not a like you should do it. It's like it took somebody to start Trans Day of Remembrance too, and it took somebody to start Trans Day of Visibility. And so maybe it's something that we begin to talk about more openly in our community, so we can have awareness. I mean, we know it, but we don't actually have good data. And so I'm thinking about, like what can each of us do? What as we leave this space today, what are each of us going to carry with us, and what are each of the things that we can do? You know, I know some of the folks on this call today, Roderick, I know you love data. Where is the trans data? Like How do we do it? How do we pull it in? What do we need to know as trans community? What do you know that might help us? You know, Felix, I heard you say, you know, as a cisgender dude, you know, you carry certain things with you in your world. Yet I see you flying the trans flag. You know, what happens if you fly that in every Zoom meeting you're in for the rest of this month and next month and let people ask you why you're flying it? You know, um, Serrano, you know, you have a name that is gender neutral. Talk about it. Like, what does that mean? Like it's one of few names in Spanish and Portuguese language that is kind of gender neutral. That's a great way to kind of like bring that conversation in. And that's just three of you. You know, and there's things that we can all do every day in every way to kind of bring trans awareness up and think about trans lives. And it doesn't just have to be this month, or it just doesn't have to be on the 20th. It doesn't just have to be Give to the Max or Give Out Day. It's who are those people every day in your world? You know, how many of you on this call have, you know, reached out to Philippe and been like, you know, you did a good run, you know, I'm proud of you as a trans person representing the city of Minneapolis, you know? Um, and those are just like a few things. And I think, you know, we all have stuff we can do. And if that's, you know, whatever. You know, my mom once, you know, corrected the lady at Walmart with my gender and, you know, told the clerk that, you know, no, it Rox uses they, them. And that's what she could do that day. And, you know, I went on to have the conversation with my mom that the clerk at Walmart really doesn't care. And I don't really care if she knows my pronouns because I'm never probably going to really talk to her again. And it was a way for her to kind of participate. It was a way for her to acknowledge that she knows what my pronouns are and she's working on them in an everyday kind of way. And so I think, you know, as we think about Trans Day of Remembrance, as we think about masculinity and all the toxicity that goes with it, and how capitalism and white supremacy and the patriarchy back all of those things up, we can do something a little bit every single day. And sometimes we can't. And then that's our time to be graceful with ourselves and do self-care and recognize like, oh, that thing that was said was really transphobic. And today I don't have energy to give to that. And I'm not going to, and I'm okay with it.
Yeah, I think Rox, you know, there's a lot of uh, people's thoughts and comments coming in, obviously loving your ideas and the ways in which you're talking about the baby steps, like taking one step at a time and steps that are like manageable and that are simple enough, you know, and can yet be challenging because it's those simple ideas that actually can be also very challenging at the same time as well too, as we move in the way in which we are moving in the world. So appreciating those comments that are coming in, that we are worthy of remembrance, and the love that's pouring in terms of this conversation for all of us participating in this conversation. So keep welcoming those thoughts and ideas and feedback and questions into our conversation, and we'll weave it into the conversation. Myself hearing those things, I think that that's what it is for me, is that we are not asking ourselves or you as men and masculine folks to commit to something that's so beyond your own peripheral that you're like, oh my God, I can't take this on. And I think sometimes there's a narrative out there in some semblance to what Roderick was sharing there, that there's a narrative out there that like when change happens, it has to be like these grandiose ideas and these really huge things and take on things where it's like, we don't know if that can actually happen. And that might be too far removed from our own quote unquote reality of what's actually happening. But I think what you just pointed out, Rox, is that these things are so simple and so minute that it's just these small things that actually can actually change a life of a trans person, right? And the climate that allows for the violence to actually happen, and the conditions that allow for the violence to actually happen, in lifting up the visibility and lifting up and taking the veil away, and for us to actually see the data, see the violence that is actually happening, and understand why it's actually happening, right? That those small shifts that you're asking for each one of us to do in our own ways allows for us to actually create opportunities in community and opportunities in our own relationships to actually be thinking about trans folks, right? In all the ways in which we come into contact with them, in all the ways in which we have a relationship with them. Because you just, the thing is, you don't know. Unless a person feels safe enough, to Kaleb's point, to come out to you, you don't know. And who are you to be guessing around? That's so transphobic, to be going around the world and every day of your life as a cisgender person, to be pointing out and to be thinking and to be saying, you know, as if you were God or whatnot, and be pointing those things out, right? I think that that's transphobic, right? And so it's really important, I think, that if we can bring it down to a very micro level that you're sharing there, I think that that's all it is. And even in the practicing of healthy masculinity, that is included in that as well too, is those small steps that can be taken, those subtle shifts. And it's not asking people to do a lot, and it's not asking folks to move too far from what they already perhaps are doing in their own lives, if you know. And I think that the other part that I do want to share is to some of what Sean was saying earlier, and to some of what Rox shared at the beginning too, is I remembered a few years ago when I was still at Reclaim, and we had a young person who had died. I forgot how. And the most violent thing that their family, and I know that this happens in other families as well too, was to bury them in the name that was given by their parents and in the gender that was given to them by the hospital, to not in any way recognize them by the way that they wanted to be identified, by the way that they wanted to be seen and heard, right? That was the most, I think, like violent act to that person, even after they have died, right? And so I think the violence that we're talking about here is like, through the course of this person's or these folks' lives, is it's not just when they're alive, but even in death, that they are still experiencing violence as well too, right?
I think, Serrano, when you were first sharing, a memory came to me of, I don't even know, a couple years back. And I think it was right around the time you were first starting working at Men's Peacemakers, and you were having a Trans Day of Remembrance event, and you showed up, and a couple other folks showed up, and I think that keeps coming to my brain too, because I think oftentimes people who are allies or who are wanting to be allies, you know, they choose not to show up because they don't want to take up space, or they think they're going to say the wrong thing, or they don't know what to say or what to do. And so just that memory of you, Serrano, and, you know, I can picture this picture that was taken at that vigil too, with you and some other folks from MAP. And it just, like, that means so much when people just show up, and you don't have to do anything or be a pro or know all the things, but like just showing up and recognizing like this is a hard time for so many of us. And just you know, like I'm thinking about our vigil coming up here on Saturday here in Duluth. and just, hoping, in my heart, I do. I hope that my cis friends and relatives will show up and be there, even if you don't say anything the whole time. Just like people being there and helping to sort of hold the sadness, to help hold the grief that me and so many other folks are feeling. Yeah, so just like showing up can be really scary, but also it, for me, at least personally speaking, it really means a lot and deeply impacts me.
Thanks for sharing, buddy. I've been thinking about Rox. Shout out to Rox for saying, what can you actually do within your personal life, right? I was just thinking about that, and earlier before we recorded, we are talking about the holidays coming up, right? Like, um, check on your trans and queer friends. What are you doing for the holidays? You got a place to have a meal? You're gonna be okay? Because I will guarantee you, like, most of the queer and trans folks will probably have no plans. And I don't know. I think there's this type of loneliness within the trans community that you would not know or feel unless you are trans. So like while you're having a good time, at the expense of who, right? You're having a great time, but who's not? So checking in on your folks. And I'm also, this is something I've been thinking about within my work and how I live my life. And specifically with my masculine trans friends, like how do I challenge them more? I have a lot of trans masculine folks who are like, um, I don't want to teach this person because I've been hurt a lot, right? Like, I think you, as queer and trans folks, you have an obligation to teach people where you're in relationships with them, right? Like, if I have a relationship with my dad and I'm telling him he's patriarchal and he tells me how, I'm not gonna say I'm not gonna tell you go and learn, because I actually have an obligation to teach him because I have that relationship with him. I love him and I care about him, right? Like, so like for my masculine trans folks, like when folks are being homophobic and transphobic and you have a relationship with this person, you actually do have to teach them. I think it's different if it's like a white man who's just violently on the street to you. Like, you don't have to teach them shit and you could tell them to fuck off. But like when you have a relationship with folks, you have to teach them. And that's also something I've been thinking about, how what I can do as myself, right? Like, how can I move the people around me who I love and care about? And I think it's hard for a lot of folks when they've been hurt a lot.
Caleb, I really appreciate you saying that. I think self-care is so important. And it's something that um, many of us have unlearned in trying to be brilliant and brown and queer and all of those things. Um, and some of us hold shame and guilt about doing those things. But it's really vital and it's really important for us to know when it is something for us to teach and when it is something for us to maybe provide a resource or direct resource to and let the other person go and learn. One of the things my parents and my grandparents used to say to me that I'm sure kids today don't hear, but that is, go look it up in the dictionary, go look it up in the encyclopedia, right? Because there is something that happens to uh, to us at a cellular matter when we put in the energy and effort to do the learning, to go and find the resources and to look it up. And so while I think that you're really right that we do have a responsibility. Our brothers and sisters and fam are our responsibility. And if you want to be in relationship with somebody, it's important to share in knowledge. Knowledge is power. And it's really important to kind of know um, when it's okay to redirect someone to do their own work.
Yeah, I really appreciate leaving it, for me at least, leaving with that note about like doing more. I think definitely to the comment that's coming in that cisgender folks are having to do the heaviest lifting. For sure, no doubt about that. The responsibility and accountability is for sure on cisgender people because of the way in which we have constructed a binary in this society to be looking at men and women only, and anything outside of that deemed as not safe, deemed as violent. But when in fact, we haven't looked at the people who actually chosen violence and used violence, that we haven't talked about those people enough at the same time too. I really, really want to appreciate, for me, at least in this conversation, everybody as always, my comrades, siblings that have always been here, and really appreciating Rox and Kayleb for joining us in this conversation, and hoping that the two of you come back and join us in other conversations now that you've come into one, you're a part of the series, and you're always welcome to come back every other Thursday when you want to. Just hop in and join us through the Zoom link that we shared with both of you. And so if none of you already know about these two folks who are watching or paying attention, they're really pioneers in their own ways. Rox, current or former Bush Fellow with me as well. They've done great, amazing work in the community, especially in Minneapolis and throughout the state as well too, really around trans folks. And that's why they wear so many different hats, is when you're a pioneer, that's what you do, is you wear many different hats and paving the way for folks. And then for Kayleb himself, really pioneering the ways of new concepts and ideas on masculinity, particular to trans men in the Southeast Asian community. So really thankful for the two of you's leadership, humbleness, and for your presence, and always appreciative of the two of you's relationship with me in this. And then I'll give it back to Sean to close us out. I know there's a couple things on here, and I know Rox shared about Trans Remembrance Virtual that's happening as well too. So I don't know if you want to share about that, Rox, a little bit before we toss it to Sean here to close out.
Sure, I'd love to share the little bit that I know. This event happens annually here in Minneapolis, and is hosted by one of our elders and esteemed family members, Barb Satin. And so I don't even know for how many years Barbara's been holding that down at different venues, and most recently Living Table Church. However, it's still COVID, and COVID is real. And so that event will be online this year. And you can just put into your, Facebook search, or, if you need to hit somebody up, you can hit me up or hit Sean or anybody else on this panel up and get a link to that.
For sure. Yep. Hit us up. We want to share all this information with all of you. We want to see all of you showing up. And again, I'm very grateful for Rox and Kayleb being here today. And there's something about that. Trans folks having an opportunity to lead conversations like this, and to collaborate with groups and community folks who are wanting to elevate us and the issues that our community is dealing with. So thank you to you both again for being here. Very grateful. And we're very grateful for all of you who have tuned in, who've been here with us as we're live having this conversation. And for any of you who are watching after the fact, thank you for taking the time to learn more about trans folks, Trans Day of Remembrance. And again, we really encourage each of you to think about what are the ways, what are these baby steps that you can take in your life with your partner and your families, your friends. We all have so many spheres of influence. So the possibility is huge that y'all could do some good work, and trans folks can hopefully, in the future experience way less violence in our communities. So thanks again for joining us for our 31st kitchen table conversation. We also want to just give a reminder for any of you who have the funds and the ability to donate on Give to the Max Day, which is today. I think we're dropping some of these links in the comments, but you can search for Minnesota Trans Health Coalition. Definitely donate to them today. Mena's Peacemakers, Esperanza United, and Transforming Generations are all groups that we collaborate with and are in relationship with in this work to end and prevent violence. We also want to take a minute to thank our funding partners, Blue Cross Blue Shield of Minnesota and the Novo Foundation, for all of their support and partnership continued. And as a reminder, we are holding these kitchen table conversations every other Thursday at noon Central Standard Time, live on our Facebook page. So make sure you like our page. You can also find us on YouTube and watch all 31 conversations now. It might take you a little bit, but you can do it. I encourage you. They're really good. Check them out. And again, thank you all for joining us. We hope you take good care, and yeah, it'll be great to be back again in another 2 weeks on December 2nd. So we'll see y'all later.